your bootcamp or your session for the Platform Developer 1 certification exam. Congratulations. You are here because probably you want to become certified, and hopefully you will conquer that by the end of this year, or maybe starting next year. So the first thing that I'm going to share with you is some housekeeping slide. This is the first one. It is the forward-looking statement. And this basically says that you should buy Salesforce for how awesome it is today and not how awesome it's going to be in the near future, right? Sometimes, or maybe during this presentation, I may do one or two forward-looking statements. When I do, safe harbor, just remember to buy Salesforce for what is currently available now and not the new features we're going to release very soon. Another thing that you should know is that all of the content that we're going to present is copyrighted, including the slides that we're sharing, the audio and the video of this session. All right. My name is Clara Perez, and I am going to be your instructor for today. Let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I've been within the ecosystem for more than a decade. I started back in 2011. Of course, I do have the Platform Developer 1 certification, Developer 2, Architect certifications, and also I am a certified Trailhead instructor. I am certified to train you or to teach this class and also the JavaScript Developer 1 class, right? So that's a little bit about me. I am thrilled to be your instructor, and I am here to share with you the knowledge I have about the certification and give you some tips and tricks on how to best pass the certification. All right, let's talk about the objectives of this course. Hopefully you are here because you are wanting to become a developer one professional. And in order to do so, there are certain things you need to meet. For example, you have to know a little bit about the declarative tools that admin use, but mostly you have to know about all of those programmative tools that we use for customizing the platform. And this is my goal here. These are my objectives. By the end of this session, you should be able to describe what it is that you're going to face during the certification. What is the structure of the exam? What are the sections of the exam? Which of those sections have the most weight? So which of them are you going to receive the most questions on, right? And of course, we're going to talk about all of the cool features that makes you a developer in the Force.com platform. We're going to talk about Apex, Sockwell, Social, Lightning Web Components, Visual Force Pages, Aura Components, and we're also going to be able to explain some important concepts that are unique to the Salesforce platform, like, for example, governor limits or test classes, okay? By the end of this session, you should also leave with a solid understanding of what is the application life management within a Salesforce project. How do you get a requirement? How do you develop that requirement, test it, and finally, how do you release it to the next environment, which probably is going to be a production org, and get it out there so that those users can use your features. All right? So those are the course objective of today. And this is the agenda. We're going to be here for about 5 hours, right? And during those 5 hours, my goal is to cover all of the content that you will need to successfully pass a certification. But let me make this clear. I cannot teach you from scratch all of the concepts, all right? Hopefully by now you should have a little bit of knowledge on all of the things we're going to talk about. And this course should be a refresher for you, all right? But I promise you I'm going to do my best to cover all of those tricky topics that might be a little bit more difficult for you to grasp on your own. So lesson 1, we're going to talk about the course and exam. Lesson 2 is going to be about the fundamentals of developing in the Force.com platform. Then lesson 3 and 4 are going to be about process automation and logic. And when we talk about these two sections right here, lessons 2 and 3, we're also going to be talking about some of the declarative tools that we have in the system. And we're also going to be talking about some programmatic tools like Apex classes and triggers. And we're going to see how they interact with each other. Lesson 5 is going to be all about the user interface. And every single time you interface, you need to think about 3 main technologies in what components. We're going to see how are they different? When should we use one versus another one? Okay. And finally, we're going to talk about testing, debugging, and deployment. All right. So that's the agenda. Let's go right into lesson 1. Now, I am probably going to go very fast on lessons 1 and 2, because I really want to deep dive into lessons 3, 4, and 5, which I think are the most important content of this webinar. All right. So the first thing that you need to understand in order to be successful within the certification is, what are you facing, right? What are the things that the resources that you can tap into to study for the certification? And how does the exam looks? So the ideal candidate for this certification is someone that has 2 main things. They have at least 1 or 2 years as a developer. It doesn't have to be a Salesforce developer. It could be a developer or experience in a platform outside of Salesforce. Like, for example, Java, C#, Python, and so many others. And you should complement that knowledge with at least 6 months of experience within the Salesforce platform. Why? Because those 6 months right there is going to give you enough information to distinguish what is unique about Salesforce versus the other platforms that you may encounter out there. All right? Now, this is a visual representation of the things you're going to be tested on and how important they are to pass the certification. You see, the exam is going to be a multiple choice and sometimes multiple select exam, and it's going to contain up to 60 questions. And there's going to be 5 non-score questions randomly placed. In order to successfully pass the exam, you need to have 68% or more in correct answers. So if you do the math, you have 60 questions and you need to obtain at least 68%. That means that you will need to answer at least 41 questions correctly to pass the exam. And those 60 questions are going to be divided in 4 objectives. Developer fundamentals. What is unique about being a developer? How do you declare a variable, a class, a method? What is the difference between a static method versus a member method? How do you declare constants, all right? Then, and that's 23%, so you're going to get around 12, 11 questions on that. Then process automation and logic. As you can see, this is the one that has the highest weight. So you're probably going to get between, I don't know, 17 to 20 questions here, okay? And finally, well, we have also user interface. Again, visual first pages, Aura components, and Lightning Web component, which is 25%. That means that you will get exactly 15 questions on those three technologies. And finally, but not least, we have testing, debugging, and deployment with 22%, right? Now, something that is important to you is that you should continuously review the passing mark because they change. For example, back in the days when I took the certification in 2012, and the best way to check that information is to go to Trailhead and check the certification exam guide. So just go to trailhead.salesforce.com, credentials, certificate, developer phase, right? Scroll all the way down, then find that platform developer one. All right. Once you are here, click on the exam guide, and there you go. You're going to have the same facts that I share with you, but the most updated version of them. I highly recommend you take 1 or 2 minutes to look over this resource, especially all of these bullet points, because this is going to tell you what are the things you need to know in order to pass the certification. But the last bullet point is important because it's going to tell you what are the things you do not need to know in order to pass the certification. That way you can focus on the things you need to know. And as I said before, well, you can check all of the facts that I share with you about the exam, some other training references, and then those exam objectives with even more description or detail right here, right? So go ahead and if you haven't done it, bookmark this tab because it's going to become very handy, all right? So that's the course. I mean, that's the exam. That is what you're going to face. And in order to face that successfully, then you have to prepare. And we're going to start with lesson 2. By the way, we're going to have 5 hours together, so we will have some breaks, okay? About every 2 hours and a half, we're going to have a 10-minute break so we can go to the bathroom, get more coffee, tea, water, and then come back fresh to get new content. All right? So let's go ahead and get started here. Developer fundamentals. Remember, this is 23% of the exam. So doing the math real quickly, you're going to get around 13 questions, maybe 14, all right? And these are the things that you must understand in order to perform well in the developer fundamental sections. You need to understand core concepts, like for example, what is a multi-tenant environment? What is the MVC architecture? And what is the Lightning component framework? We're all going to talk about all of these concepts in a couple of minutes. If you do a scenario, you need to identify the best practice to choose to actually write code versus to go declaratively, right? You also need to understand what are the governor limits, what are formula fields, and what are rollup summaries, and what's the difference between a formula field and a rollup, and what are some use cases on which you should use a formula versus a rollup summary. So as you can see, if you are already an admin, or if you have taken the app builder certification, or if you are a ranger in Trailhead, probably some of these concepts, you know them already, and that's great. You have a head start, right? You have an advantage because some of the content of this platform, the developer one certification, right? Now, you should also be proficient on data modeling, which is creating objects, fields, and relationships, especially knowing how to use all external IDs, all right? And finally, if we give you a scenario, you should understand and know how to choose the tools to either import data into Salesforce or export data out of Salesforce. All right? Very good. So let's go and dive into the developer fundamentals. We're going to talk about three main topics. What is the multi-tenant concept? What are the customization options we have? We're going to talk about data modeling, and finally, data management. All right, so let's start off with the multi-tenancy, multi-tenant concept, all right? So an ecosystem is multi-tenant if various tenants, various other systems within it share resources. And the best definition or the best analogy I can give you about a multi-tenancy is picture yourself living in a community that has many buildings on it. All right. For example, I myself, I live in a place where there are like 5 buildings, and each of those buildings have 4 stores, right? 4 stories. I live on the 4th floor of one of the buildings. And we share, all of us that live here, we share some things in common. For example, the parking lot, the stairways, the gym, the pool. And there are some rules that we all follow. For example, I wouldn't go in and park my car in my neighbor's parking spot. Or if I go to the gym and I use one of those equipments, I would wipe them up a little bit so that the next person that uses it finds them a little bit clean, right? There's also another thing that we all share in common. Every single month, we pay a maintenance fee. And that maintenance fee takes care of so many things that I don't have to worry. For example, cleaning up the pool, cleaning the pot, painting the buildings, and all of that stuff. Well, Salesforce is very similar to living in a building because every single time you get a Salesforce org, which is an organization, an instance, then you are a tenant. And just like my analogy of the building, it's like getting your own apartment within the cloud. You will be the only one who have access to that apartment and your users. And because you own that apartment, then you can paint the walls as you like, hang some art walls, open the fridge, go to your master room, and just like in Salesforce, you will be able to customize that org. Now, there are several things that org shares among each other. One of them is the database. Sometimes the records within my organization might live within the same database that your record lives, okay? Other things that we share are metadata indexes, field history, relationships, data storage, for example, and many others. Now, the way that Salesforce uniquely identify what is my data and my customization versus yours is because every single org has a unique identifier. And that identifier is pre-appended to every thing that you do and create in Salesforce. So if I create an account, which is basically that record is going to have actually 2 IDs, the ID of the account, but it's also going to be marked or stamped with my org's ID. And that's how Salesforce is able to take this of limit. I call them soft limits because you get certain amount and then you can call your executive and ask for more. We also share other type of limits that are called the runtime engine limits. These are also known as the governor limits. I call them hard limits, because we get a set amount of them and we need to comply with that. There's no way that you're going to be able to call Salesforce and tell them, hey, I really want more governor limits on my org just because, and I'm going to pay you extra for that. Sometimes they'll do the exception, but the rule will be, nope, you have to comply with the governor limits. Let me give you a couple of examples of these runtime engine limit. For example, the number of times you consult the data as a number of times that you alter the database, you create record, delete a record, that's another governor limit. And you as a developer should know them by heart. Let me give you two great resources. The first one is the governor limits cheat sheet. Know them as the back of your hand, as your first name and last name. When someone asks me, for example, what's your name? I don't hesitate and I simply reply, my name is Clara Perez. Okay? I want you to have the same level of confidence as of social statements or SOQL statements that you can do transaction governor. And you should be enough to say, well, it depends. If the transaction is synchronous, that's 100. And if the transaction is asynchronous, then you get 200, right? So by all means, try to memorize this table. You are developing and troubleshooting code, and also for when you're taking the exam, right? Now, the other thing I want to show you is how to locate your org's unique ID. This is a developer org. It's one of Salesforce's free orgs that you can get. And if you go to the setup menu and then you type in company, then you can see the company information menu. And here, you're going to be able to see several things. One of them is your unique org ID limit we were talking about. For example, data space. You get certain amount, maybe 1 gigabyte or 2 gigabytes. And if you're running very close to the limit, you're running out of a space, then you can call your executive and ask for more. And your executive is going to ask you for more money. Okay? So some of these are those soft limits. But then there are others that are hard limits, and you need to understand them and respect them. All right, so let's talk about the MVC architecture. MVC. M stands for model, and a model is anything that is able to represent data or activity about the data. For example, your objects and fields. You have V for the view, and view is anything that is capable of showing you the data. For example, page layouts, app builders, visual first pages, Aura components, Lightning Web components, even reports, right? Because they take information on the objects and they display them to the user. And finally, we have the controllers. Every single time you hear the word controller, you have to picture a brain, because that is exactly what the controller is. It is the brain that has all of the instructions as to what happens when a user interacts with the model through the view. So the user sees this beautiful page, they click a button, the controller knows what to do for when they are clicking that button. Are we going to edit? Are we going to save? Are we going to delete? Are we changing something? That's the responsibility of the controller. And we're going to talk a lot about controllers in this webinar. Now, here are two questions for you. I think this is a great time for you to get a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, or open your favorite text edit tool and answer these questions. What do you think a custom object is part of? Is it part of the model, the view, or the controller? What about a page layout? Is that part of the model, the view, or controller? If you answer model for the object, you're right. And if you answer view for the page layout, then you are also right. Okay? All right, let's talk about customization options. As a developer, you're going to have options to customize Salesforce. Some of those options are going to be the cool thing about these options is that you do not need to know how to program, how to write code to use them. Now, this is a summary of all of those automation tools that we have available to us. Process builders, flows, workflows. It shows me right here on the left side some common scenarios that we might need to fulfill. For example, someone tells you, you know what? After someone submits a form, a lead is created, and I want you to send an email 3 days later to that lead to let them know. The same for cases, all right? So which do you think are the automation tools that allows you to send time-based notifications or take time-based actions? I'll give you a second or two to think about that. Can Process Builder do them? Can Process Builder process actions at a later time? The answer is yes. Can Flow do that? The answer is yes. Can a workflow do this? The answer is also yes. What about approvals? Can approvals do that? The answer is no. Okay? So if you get a scenario on which you need to fulfill time-based actions, now you know approval processes are not the way to go. Now, what about automation tools that support interaction with the user? As you can see, Process Builder is not one of them, because a Process Builder only gets launched when something happened to the database, when a record was inserted or updated, or when a platform event was received. Flows, on the other hand, they are very powerful because you have many types of flows that you can create. One of them is a screen flow. Within a screen flow, you get to ask the user some questions, wait for their answers, and based on their answer, then do X or Y. So flows, they do support user interactions. Workflows, on the other hand, they do not, just like Process Builder. And finally, approvals, they do support user interactions because in order for a record to go into an approval process, something that might need to happen is that a user has to submit it for the approval process. That's an interaction. And not only that, but when a record is in an approval process, there's going to be other users that have to either approve the record or reject them. Those are also user interactions. Let's go to the next scenario. Which of these tools are capable of calling Apex code? Process builders can do that. Flows are able to as well. But workflows and approvals, they cannot do that. And finally, which of these records are able to delete a record on their own without Apex? Process builders cannot do that. Flows are able to do that. Workflows cannot do that. And approval processes are also not able to do that. As you can see from this table, flows are the most powerful automation tool that you have. And not only that, there are two tools on this screen that have been deprecated: workflows and process builder. So what does this tells you as a student? It tells you that flows should be the automation tool of your choice. If you get a question on which the answers are process builders or workflow, now you know not to choose those answers because those two tools have been deprecated. And in fact, the recommendation as of today from Salesforce is to use flows. Approvals, as you can see, are not deprecated and they should be considered as a good automation tool to use, right? Now, before I move on, let me give you a quick show and tell about how awesome are flows. If you are in the setup menu and you type in flow, then you're going to get to a view where you can see all of the flows within your system. But you can also create a new one. And the first thing that you're going to be asked is, which type of flow do you want to create? That is how powerful flows are. Screen flows, they're going to interact with users. Schedule trigger flows are going to run at a later time. Auto launch flow are those that you can invoke from an Apex trigger or Apex or another flow. Orchestrations heavily used when you need to do multi-step process involving multiple transactions. Platform events are flows that react to when a platform event is inserted. We're going to talk about platform events. Just think of them as a notification. Something happened inside of Salesforce or outside of Salesforce, and Salesforce need to do something about it. And finally, record trigger flows, which are my favorite ones because they are very, very powerful. If you choose a record trigger flow, you will need to specify an object, okay? And then you can specify when should we trigger that flow, when an account is created, when it's updated, both, or when an account is deleted. Now, if you choose one of the 3 bullet points on top, then you will be able to select something else. You will be able to select the context of the flow. When should we action? Before the record is saved to the database, this one, updates, or after the record is saved to the database, actions and related records. The huge difference here is that if you're working with records related to the one that launched the flow, you should go with actions and related records. Let me give you a nice example. Your lead comes in and tells you, I want that every single time an account is created for the first time, immediately the system creates an opportunity and relates that opportunity to the account. See, that's a perfect scenario for after flow or actions and related records. Every single time a lead feel empty, I want you to default that to, let's say, google.com. All right, that's a dummy example. But basically, we're trying to manipulate the record before it inserted to the database. That is the huge difference between fast fill update and actions and related. Why am I telling you this? Because on unit 4 or lesson 4, we're going to come back to flows. All right? Okay, cool. Let's move on. Now, not only you have automation tools that you can use to customize the platform, you also have other options. For example, you can customize the platform with point and click tools, like the ones we just talked about, right? Flows, approvals, creating fields, creating formulas. The cool thing about this approach is that it gives you simplicity and speed. What does that mean? It means that you can wake up at 10 and by 4 p.m., you have an application or a feature ready to be deployed to the production environment. Another option that you have is the app exchange, and many developers overlook this option. When we get a requirement and we see that it cannot be met with point and click, we simply jump into the programmatic tools. But that's not a good approach. We should go to the app exchange and see whether there is already an app that can fulfill our needs. The cool thing about this approach is that it is already built, so it's going to save you time, and sometimes it's going to save you money, and sometimes it's going to save you maintenance overhead. Okay? And they are proven solutions that have been approved by Salesforce. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. Okay? And depending on the app, some may include support. So by all means, every single time you get a requirement, check whether you can meet it with point and click tools, declarative tools. If not, go to the app exchange, see if there's an app that makes sense for the business requirement. And if those two options fail, then we get to do the things we love, which is writing code. The cool thing about the pro-code approach or the programmatic approach is that it gives us a lot of control and flexibility. Basically, anything that you can dream of and complies with the governor limits, you can build it with code. But although it grants you control and flexibility, it also gives you one more thing. It gives you total responsibility and accountability for the things that you create. You see, the moment that you write a single line of code, now you, as the developer, are responsible for maintaining that code, making it secure, scalable, robust, and testing that code against each of the Salesforce releases. Now, here's a hidden gem, okay? Here's a nugget of gold. This slide right here, if you go from left to right, you're going to find the golden rule of developing. We always choose to develop declarative first and programmatic last. What does that mean? When you get a requirement, analyze it and see if it can be met with declarative tools. If not, then we're going to try and meet it with either app exchange or customizations. All right, now let's talk about a little bit about data modeling. When you hear the word data modeling, it's all about objects, fields, and relationships. Inside of Salesforce, data is captured within an object, okay? You can have standard objects, and you can also have custom objects. Standard objects are the ones that Salesforce create for you, and you get to use them. Can you think of a couple of standard objects that you know of? Accounts, contacts, opportunities, leads, cases, opportunity line items, products. Yeah, all of those are standard objects. Salesforce create them, you get to use them. On top of that, you can create your own objects. Those are called custom objects. They are custom because you, the developer or an admin, creates them, okay? And ideally, you're going to create custom objects for information you cannot store on a standard object. Yeah? Inside of objects, then we're going to have fields. Fields are the specific data points that it makes sense to capture for an instance of an object. For example, we have the account object. The account object represents our customers. If I'm dealing with a customer, it makes sense for me to capture the name of the company, the website, the phone number, the industry, how many employees that company has, and so on and so forth. All of those bits of information are captured in fields. And guess what? You can have standard fields created by Salesforce and used by you. And you can also have custom fields created by you or an admin. Now, this is important. You are able to create custom fields in a standard object. And you are able to create custom fields in a custom object. What you will never be able to do is create a standard field because those are created by Salesforce. And typically, the moment that you hear the word standard, it also tells you something else. You will not be able to delete that. You will not be able to delete the standard fields. You will not be able to delete standard objects. Now, as I said before, objects are the placeholder for information. But when you create an object, not only you get a table, right? Or a spreadsheet, you also get much more. For example, you get things like validation rules that allows you to identify criteria for when the record or the data within a record is not valid. You also get page layouts and record types that you can define so different users see different things. You also get to plug and play them with out-of-the-box capabilities like flows and approvals, duplicated rules, and so much more. And you also get to control who sees what and what they can do with the things they see, right? So an object, if you have to define them, is a very robust table in a database that not only stores data, it also validates data, presents the data to the user using other tools. Now, between objects, you can have relationships, okay? One object could be related to another and vice versa. Those are custom relationships or relationship fields. And they are important, just like in human life. Relationships are important, okay? There are several types of relationships you can have, but there are three of them that are the most important to you as a developer one. I'm going to go over two of them, and then I'm going to show you the other one. So first of all, you have a master detail relationship. In a master detail relationship, you have one object that is going to act as the parent and another object that is going to act as the child. And just like in normal life, one parent could have multiple children, right? But the thing about master detail relationships is that they are tightly coupled. What does that mean? A child cannot exist without a parent. That means that the parent is always required on the child. It also means that if the parent is deleted, then all of the children will be automatically deleted, right? And finally, it has a lot of impact in visibility. In order to access the child, you must have access to the parent. This is why I say when you link two objects together through a master detail relationship, the relationship is tightly coupled. There is a very intimate and close relationship between those two objects. Additionally, you will be able to add a lookup filter, and you can also choose whether to reparent or not the records once you create them. This is something very important for you. You will not be able to create a master detail relationship on which the child or the detail part is a standard object. And I'm going to give you a view of that, right? Now, the other type of relationship that you should be aware of are lookup relationships. And even though the outcome is the same, you're going to have a parent object that is connected to one or multiple children. The difference here is that they are not that tightly coupled. When you have two objects related through a lookup, the child could not have a parent. The parent out of the box is not required. It's optional. Out of the box, if you delete the parent and the parent is not made required, then you can choose what's going to happen to the child. There are three possible options. Clear the value of the field, which is basically create an orphan. Prevent the deletion of the parent record if there are children. And finally, delete the record as well. Now, this last option right here is not enabled by default. You will have to contact Salesforce to enable cascade deletion on a lookup relationship. Additionally, you will be able to add a lookup filter. All right? Now, the third type of relationship that you need to be aware of are external object relationships. You see, previously, we've talked about two objects, standard objects and custom objects. There is a third type of objects you should be aware, external objects. And external objects are going to show information that resides in another platform. Maybe you have an ERP, but you need to view the ERP records in Salesforce. For that, you're going to create an external object. An external object are able to be related to both custom objects and standard objects, and even between external objects themselves. So there are three more types of relationship fields that you should be aware. An indirect lookup, a external lookup relationship, and an indirect lookup. Okay? How do you differentiate them apart? Just look at which object is the parent. If the parent is an external object, then it's always going to be an external lookup relationship. If the parent is a standard or a custom object and the child is an external object, then that relationship type is called indirect lookup. Okay? Yes? Imagine I have an external object called SAP orders, right? And I tie that object with an account. So account is the parent and SAP order is the child. Because I have a standard object as the parent, that's an indirect lookup relationship, right? If the parent is a external object, then we're going to call it a external lookup relationship. This right here is the schema builder, and it is one of my favorite tools inside of Salesforce because it allows me to see with the eyes of my face how my objects, their fields, and how objects relate to one another. We're going to talk about how to view this with your developer eyes later on, but the schema builder is great to viewing, showcasing your objects, fields, and how they relate to one to another. Not only to view, but also to modify them. You can add custom fields to existing objects, and you can also create brand new objects. So let me give you just a quick demo here so that you know where to find this. If you go to the setup menu one more time and click the Object Manager tab, then you're going to get a list of all of your objects within the org, okay? And they're going to have a type. Some of them are going to be standard. Some of them are going to be custom. And others are going to be external objects. Now, notice something. For custom objects, the API name, which is the thing that we use to reference the object in code, is always going to end in _C. Standard objects, they do not have that prefix or suffix, okay? External objects are always going to end in $X. And there is another type of object, which is platform event, that is always going to end in $E. All right? Now, Schema Builder is right here. There's a button called Schema Builder. If I can click on them, then I'm going to be redirected to the Schema Builder, on which I can see my objects, their fields, and how they relate to one another. If you see a red link, that's because it's a master detail. If you see a blue link, it's because it is a lookup. Right? Now, remember that rule that I share with you? You cannot create a master detail field on a standard object. Check what happens if I grab the master detail and try to drop it into a contact. The contact is a standard object. It's going to tell me you cannot do this. You cannot create a master detail on the contact object because it is a standard object. However, if I grab the master detail and, for example, drop it on the movie object, which is a custom object, it should allow me to do that. It's going to think for a while, but then it's going to tell me, sure, what's the label, what's the name, etc., etc., etc. Right? Another thing that is important is that you can only have up to 3 nested master details. And there is also a limit on the number of master details that you can have in a custom object. That limit is 2. For lookup relationships in a custom object, you can have up to 40. So there's a huge difference, right? Master detail only up to 2, lookup relationship up to 40, all right? That right there is the schema builder. Fields, as I said, those are used to capture information. One type of field that we have is a formula field. And a formula field is a special field because the platform is going to calculate the value for you, right? You're going to use functions and you're going to use other fields as the formula body. And then the platform is going to run a calculation very quickly and is going to show you the result of that calculation. You can create cross-object formula fields, which are formulas that benefit from a relationship to go up to the parent and bring a value down to the child. All right, for example, you know that between account and opportunity, there is a relationship. You are able to create a formula field on the child object, which is opportunity. And then you can go up to the parent and say, I want to view the industry of the account right here on the opportunity. You can go up to 10 relationships away, and it's always up, okay? You go to the child, to the parent, to the grandparent, to the great-grandparent, and so on and so forth. Now, here's something that I really want you to write down. Okay, are you ready? This is the definition of a formula field. A formula field is a field that gets calculated on the fly, and the resulting value is never changed, is never saved to the database. I'm going to repeat that one more time. A formula field is a field that gets calculated on the fly, and the resulting value never gets saved to the database. All right? That's important. Now, formula field also have considerations. For example, a formula field is able to reference other formula fields, but will never be able to reference itself. You cannot create circular formulas. The maximum compile size is 3,900 characters. And formula fields, as I said before, are calculated every single time you access the record. If you open a page layout and there is a formula on that page layout, it's going to calculate quickly and show you the value. If you do a SQL query and you query a formula field, it's going to quickly calculate the value and show it to you. If you have a report that uses a formula and you open that report, guess what's going to happen? That value is going to quickly be calculated and the information is going to be shown. And finally, formula fields are always run in system mode. So you might expose sensitive information to the eyes of restricted user. You need to be mindful and careful. And also, because of the nature of a formula field is to be calculated at the moment in flight, then you should be careful when using them as part of a where filter on your SQL query or as part of filters on your report. Formula fields are read-only. Let me give you a quick show and tell of a formula field. So in my environment, I'm going to go to this contact, Clara Perez. And typically a contact could have a birth date, right? So now we have Clara. She was born in October 87. So that makes her around 36 years old. Let's go ahead and make Clara a little bit younger, right? Why not? So let's say that she was born in 97, actually. And then check out, this is a formula field that is going to be calculated when the value is saved. Wait, what happened? Okay, one more time. 97, 31st, save. Now Clara is much younger. As you can see, formula fields are read-only, and they are going to be calculated on the fly. You should use formula field to ensure integrity of the data. Instead of having your sales rep calculate values, if you can have a clear formula for that value, use a formula instead of having them try to calculate things and all of that stuff. Now you see this other formula field that I have here? It is a cross-object formula field because it is using a relationship or several relationships in fact. A contact is the child of an account has an owner has a profile. So I am going 4 relationships up to bring the name of the profile of the user who owns the account that this contact belongs to. Well, yeah, and it's actually pretty easy. Let me show you how I did that. If you go to the object setup, then you have fields and relationship. Here is where you can create new fields. Let's check out that profile. What's it called? Profile, user profile. As you can see, it's a formula field. If I go into that, then I can see all of the fields and relationships and formulas that are used to calculate the value. In this case, I'm using relationship. I want to go to the account, then to the owner, then to the profile, and bring me the name of the profile of the user who owns the account that this contact is in. One quick way to do so is by using I'm gonna call it the formula wizard, right? You see, when you have a relationship, there are actually 2 fields created. One is the primary key or the ID, and the other one is going to be the relationship field. Using the relationship field, then you're going to be able to access information. All right? So that's how you create a cross-object formula field. All right, let's go back here and let's talk about roll-up summaries. Roll-up summary fields are also calculated fields, but they're very different from a formula field, okay? First of all, in order to have a roll-up summary field, you must have a master detail between the two objects. That's a huge difference because formula fields, you can create them even if there's no relationship between objects or if there is a master or a lookup. But roll-up summaries, you need a master detail. Roll-up summaries are created on the master object because they're going to summarize information about the children. Okay? And there are 4 functions that a roll-up summary can do. Count, sum, get the minimum value, the maximum value. A roll-up summary field by its own cannot calculate an average, and that's important. Do not get confused on interviews or in the exam, right? Now, when you create a roll-up summary fields, you create them on the master object, for example, course, and then you summarize a child object, course deliveries, right? And then you can select one of these 4 functions, and additionally, you can add filters to them. For example, there is a special relationship between account and opportunities that allows you to create roll-up summaries. And you can say, well, I like to sum all of the amounts from the opportunities that are close won. You see, that's a filter. And something that sets apart roll-up summaries from formula is the fact, and I want you to write this down, that a roll-up summary field is a field that gets calculated by the platform and the resulting value gets saved to the database. And that has huge implication in the safe order of execution, which we're going to talk about later today. I'm going to repeat that. A roll-up summary field is a field that gets calculated by the platform and the resulting value gets saved to the database. All right? And just like formula fields, there's some considerations to have. A roll-up summary field is going to be calculated anytime that a child record is created, edited to meet the criteria, or deleted. When a roll-up summary field recalculates, the value is saved to the database. So that means any automations on the parent is going to be triggered, is going to be launched. And just like formula fields, roll-up summaries are calculated in system mode. Let me give you a few examples of roll-up summaries, all right? I'm going to go to one of my accounts. Let's do Genie Point. And I have created a few roll-up summaries and formulas here. If I scroll down, I have this opportunity summary section. And all of the things that you see here, the first 4 fields, are roll-up summaries. This one is getting me the total, so it's summing all of the amounts of all of the opportunities. This one is counting for me. This one is getting me the maximum amount and then the minimum amount. But you see this one here? This is not a roll-up summary. It's actually a formula field that is using 2 roll-up summaries to calculate the average. That's the total amount divided by the opportunities. That's going to give you an average, as you can see right here. And of course, if I add or remove or edit opportunities, then my formula fields and my roll-up summaries are also going to change. Big opportunity, and I want to say this is $1 million opportunity, and we're going to give 2.5 discount. Stage is prospecting, and close date is going to be January 1st. I'm going to save this. And if I go a little bit up, now you can see how all of my calculated fields have refreshed. Now the maximum amount is million, the minimum 30,000. We have a new total amount for opportunities, and our average has also changed. Okay. To summarize, a roll-up summary field can only be created when there is a master detail between two objects. You create them on the master object or the parent object, and you summarize information about the child records. And the value of a roll-up summary field is saved to the database, and that has huge implications in the save order of execution. All right? Apart from these fields, there are many other type of fields that you're able to create, right? If you go to edit object, and then you go to fields and relationships and click new, then you're going to have a bunch of other field types that you are able to create, like checkboxes, currency, date, time, email, geolocation, number, percent, phone, and the list goes on and on and on, all right? Now, something that happens if you create a text, an email, or a number is that you will be able to mark them as external ID. External ID means that the value of that field is actually an ID on an external system. And when you have an external ID and it's also unique, then it gives you a few advantages on Apex and where you are loading data, because you can replace a Salesforce ID by using an external ID instead, all right? So here's something I want you to study. I want you to study how to use external ID when you are working with data. I also want you to study how to use external IDs in Apex, all right? These are going to be two tools that are going to be incredibly helpful for the exam and as a developer tool. All right, let's talk about data management. As a developer, you will be tasked to import and export data out of Salesforce, especially when you're working with Scratch orgs or sandboxes, developer partial, developer pro sandboxes. You might need to bring some data from production into your sandboxes, or you might get tasked with a list of new leads because your company had a recent trade show, and you are tasked to upload that information into Salesforce, right? There are two main tools that you can use to manage data. The data import wizard, which is a very intuitive wizard that allows you to import certain objects. And then you have data loader or the APIs, which is more of a developer tool to manage data. Now, here's a few scenarios. If you need to import less than 50,000 records, then you could use both tools. You could use the data import, and you can also use the data loader. Now, something to notice about the data import wizard is that it does not support all objects. Using the data import wizard, you can only import account, contacts, leads, solutions, campaign members, custom objects, importing 1,000 products. You cannot do that with the data import wizard. You have to do it with data loader. Now, if you want to prevent duplicates when importing, then both of these tools allows you to do that. The only difference is that if you use the data import wizard, then not only you will be able to use a Salesforce ID or a unique external ID, if you use the data import wizard, you could match for duplicate using name and site for the account object, name or email for the contact and lead object, title if you're importing solutions, and the name field if you're importing custom objects. Out of these two tools, the only one that allows you to choose whether to trigger or not the workflow rules is the import wizard. If you need to load up to 15 million records, then data loader is the way to go. In fact, with data loader, or the API rather, you have no limit. You can import 5 millions, 10 millions, 20 millions, as long as you have the data storage for that. As I said before, not all of the objects are supported by the data import wizard. So if you're tasked with loading products, opportunities, cases, then your best bet is to go with the API or data loader. Data loader also allows you to schedule imports. So maybe you get a list of, I don't know, 500 opportunities, but you don't want to upload that in the middle of a working day. You probably want to do that at 10 p.m. at night, all right? So with data loader or the APIs, you can run a script and say, at 10:30 tonight, go ahead and load these 50 or 500 opportunities. You can also save the mappings for later use. And finally, with the APIs, you will be able not only to import data, but also to export and delete data. The data import wizard is only for importing. So that means inserting new records or updating existing ones. If you need to offload, if you need to extract data, if you need to delete data, then you have to use the API or data loader, okay? All right. I told you I went very fast on our first two lessons. Lesson 1, the course and the exam. Lesson 2, go down a little bit because we're going to get in the heavier objectives of the exam, which is process automation and logic, okay? Remember that this is 30% of the exam. And again, doing that math one more time, that is about 18 questions that you're going to get. That's a lot of questions, okay? And here are the objectives or the topics on which you're going to get questions. You'll need to be able to identify the capabilities of declarative automation features, like validation rules, like formula fields, like roll-up summaries and flows. You also need to know how to declare constants, variables, methods, how to use modifiers and Apex interfaces. You see, now we're getting into the pro code tools. Additionally, When we give you a scenario, you need to identify which control flow statement should be used. We're going to talk about this and we're going to do examples as well. You need to know how to proficiently write SOCL, SOQLs, and DMLs. And by the way, what are those, right? We're going to give you a scenario and you have to identify what's going to happen in regards to the governor limits. Are they going to be exceeded? Are they not going to be exceeded? And if they're going to be exceeded, how can we refactor the code so that that doesn't happen? And then those 5 bullet points are the things that we're going to talk about during the first part. In the second part, we're going to talk about the 3 remaining bullet points. All right? Okay. These are the topics we're going to talk about in part 1. Apex one-on-one. So if you are a developer already of another platform or another language, there's going to be some of the content that is going to be super easy for you to grasp. But then I'm also going to give you information about what makes Apex different from all other programming languages. And if you are brand new, if you're a brand new developer, this is the section that you cannot miss. Pay full attention because I'm going to go from 0 to hero in Apex. Then we're going to talk about SOQL, SOCL. Those are 2 languages that we use to consult the database. DMLs, the language that we use to alter the database. And finally, we're going to talk about how to work with exceptions and governor limits. Okay? The first question, of course, is what is Apex? And let me tell you, this definition that you see on your screen, I love it. I truly, truly love it. In fact, I'm just going to read it out loud for you. Apex is Salesforce's cloud-based, object-oriented programming language specifically designed for customizing and extending apps on the platform. That's a huge definition. Let me break it down by chunks. First of all, Apex is Salesforce's. That means that Salesforce created Apex. And the only place that you will be able to run Apex is in a Salesforce environment. A developer org, a production, a Scratch org, a sandbox, only in a Salesforce environment. Salesforce is, secondly, cloud-based. That means that every single line of code that you write is going to be compiled, saved, and executed inside of a Salesforce server. If you use an IDE like Visual Studio Code, there is a copy of the code on your computer, but the actual code is going to live in the clouds. Number 3, Apex is object-oriented. And for those of you who are programmers on another platform or languages like Java and C#, you know what this is, right? Apex is going to have those 4 attributes. You will be able to benefit from encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, and abstraction. Okay, for those of you who do not know a lot about code, just understand Apex is awesome. And finally, this is the part that I like the most because Apex was specifically designed for customizing and extending apps on the platform. What does that mean? It means a lot. It means, for example, that Apex is already aware of all of your features. It knows about your objects. It knows about your fields. It knows about the relationship between them. And not only that, it also knows about the data that objects store. And this is huge. Because with Apex, you don't have to create a connection to the database. Apex is already aware of the database. Apex works in conjunction and seamlessly with declarative feature. For example, we saw that. We can use a flow to call an Apex method. We can even call Apex method from a button. Apex also have access to your org's metadata. Well, what does that mean? It knows about your validation rules, your duplication rules. It knows about entitlement rules and all of the required fields you've made. And finally, it was designed to work effectively and efficiently in a multi-tenant environment. Remember a multi-tenant environment? There are several people living on the same building. There are resources that are shared. Some of them are constricted resources, aka governor limits. Guess what? Apex knows the governor limit by heart and will enforce them on every line of code and every automation that you create. That's why it is so important to a developer and even admins to understand the governor limits as well. Because the moment that you exceed, that you try to exceed a governor limit, then you're going to be faced with an exception. Now, as I said before, Apex is already aware of your objects, their fields, and the relationship between them. And the way that we reference an object or a field in Apex is by the use of the API name, okay? You see, in Salesforce, you're going to have a field label, which is what the user sees, and you're going to have a field API name, which is what developers and admin use to reference that field or object in declarative configuration or programmatic configuration. And something unique happens every time you use a field in Apex or in other declarative configuration. There is a reference back to that field. And the moment that you reference a field, then you will not be able to delete that field, and you will not be able to change the metadata, the type of field that field is. All right? So you have to be aware of that. Now, let's start talking more about Apex. In Apex, we have primitives, we have data types, just like we have data types for fields, right? In Apex, we create variables. Variables would be the analogous of a field. It's going to capture a piece of information. And primitives are the data types of our variables and constants. We have blob or blob, which is basically used for attachments and encryptions. Boolean, which is true or false. Date time. Decimal, which is a number with a floating point, like 3.14. Double is a very large decimal. ID is a special type that represents a Salesforce ID, either the 18-digit version or the 15-digit version. Then we have integers. Those are numbers with no decimal points, like 5, 15, 36. Long is a very large integer. String is a sequence of numbers and texts or text. And time is a time of the day, like 9 a.m., 8 o'clock, 12 p.m. In Apex, we call all of these primitive, but they are not really primitives. Because in other languages like Java, a primitive cannot have a property or methods. In Apex, you can. You can, for example, ask whether a string of text is alphanumeric or not. Or you can instantiate a date from right now's time, okay? Now, the way we create a variable in Apex is by providing the variable with a data type, the name of the variable, okay? If you do not provide a value to a variable, it means that it's going to hold no value, which is null. Null is a special data type that represents the absence of a value. And then the way we create constants is by using the final access modifier. You can have member constants or static constants. What is a constant? A constant is a variable whose value cannot change. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, I have a bottle, okay, just like this one. A bottle is able to contain liquids or things, right? In this case, water. If I label this, I put in a label of water, then only water can go into this bottle. If I label this as coffee, only coffee can go into the bottle. That's using exact the same as variable. And I'm going to show you this, okay? There's one special place in